Welcome to our latest horror compilation, where the lines between reality and terror blur. Join us as we delve into the heart of Wisconsin's most chilling legends, centered around the elusive Dogman. From eerie encounters to bone-chilling plot twists, these stories will leave you on the edge of your seat. So, sit back, dim the lights, and immerse yourself in the fear that haunts these woods. But be warned, once you've entered this world, there's no turning back. The Beast of Bray Road Revisited. I've always been fascinated by local legends, and one of the most intriguing ones is the Beast of Bray Road. It's a creature that's said to roam the roads around Elkhorn, Wisconsin, and it's been the subject of countless stories and sightings over the years. As a journalist, I decided to investigate further to see if there was any truth behind the legend. I started by talking to locals who claimed to have seen the beast. They described it as a large, wolf-like creature with glowing eyes, often seen running down Bray Road. Some said it was a werewolf, while others believed it was something entirely different. But one thing was consistent: the fear in their voices when they spoke about it. I spent weeks researching, poring over old newspapers and police reports, looking for any evidence that might support the legend. And then I stumbled upon something strange. There were a number of accidents and fatalities on Bray Road over the years, all of which seemed to be connected to sightings of the beast. I decided to visit the road itself to see if I could find any clues. As I drove down the winding stretch of asphalt, I felt a sense of unease. The trees seemed to loom over me, casting long shadows in the fading light. I stopped at a spot where several sightings had been reported, and that's when I saw it. A figure in the distance, running towards me. My heart racing, I grabbed my camera and started to take pictures. But as I looked through the lens, I realized that the figure was gone. I was left standing there, feeling foolish and scared. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see the beast standing behind me. And then I started to notice strange things happening around me. Equipment would go missing, and I'd find strange symbols etched into the walls of my hotel room. It was then that I realized the beast wasn't just a creature. It was a harbinger of doom. Every person who had crossed its path had met with tragedy or death. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized that I might be next. I tried to leave, to get as far away from Bray Road as possible, but it was too late. I started to experience strange visions. Glimpses of accidents and disasters that hadn't happened yet. And then I saw my own face in one of those visions, lying broken and battered on the side of the road. I knew then that I was marked. The beast had seen me, and it had judged me. I was going to die, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. As I drove away from Bray Road for the last time, I felt a sense of resignation. I knew that my fate was sealed, that I was just waiting for the inevitable. And then I heard it, the sound of tires screeching, metal crunching. I looked up to see a car careening towards me, out of control. In that moment, I knew that the beast had come for me. It wasn't just a creature, it was a force of nature, a harbinger of doom. And as the car crashed into mine, I felt my world go black. When I came to, I was lying in a hospital bed, my body broken and bruised. But as I looked around, I realized that something was off. The room was empty, and there was a strange symbol etched into the wall above my bed. It was the same symbol I had seen before, the same symbol that marked those who had crossed the beast's path. I knew then that I had been given a second chance, a chance to warn others about the Beast of Bray Road. But as I looked deeper into the symbol, I realized that it wasn't just a warning. It was a curse. I was marked for death, and there was no escape. The fear of being marked for death by a supernatural force, it's a fear that I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. And if you ever find yourself driving down Bray Road, just remember, you might not be alone. The beast is always watching, waiting for its next victim. And once you've seen it, there's no turning back. You're marked, and you'll never be able to escape the doom that follows. The Cryptid Hunter's Dilemma. I've spent years researching and hunting cryptids. Bigfoot, the Mothman, you name it. But my latest obsession was the Dogman. There had been sightings all over Wisconsin, and I was determined to catch one. I set up my gear in the woods near Fitchburg, where there had been a recent sighting. It was a chilly autumn night, the kind that makes you feel like you're being watched. I had my cameras, traps, and a whole lot of patience. I'd been out there for hours, waiting for something to happen. And then it did. I heard this howling. It was deep and haunting, and it seemed to be coming from just out of sight. I grabbed my camera and started to move towards the sound. As I walked, the howling got louder, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. Suddenly I saw it, the Dogman. It was huge, with eyes that glowed like embers in the dark. I snapped pictures and tried to stay calm, but my hands were shaking. I managed to set off a tranquilizer dart, and the Dogman collapsed to the ground. I approached it cautiously, feeling a mix of excitement and fear. As I looked closer, I realized that it wasn't just a beast. It was different. Its body seemed to shift and ripple, like it was made of something that wasn't quite solid. I took some samples and decided to bring it back to my lab for further study. But as I was loading it into my truck, I felt this strange sensation, like the air around me was charged with electricity. When I got back to the lab, I started running tests. But the more I learned, the more I realized that the Dogman wasn't just a creature, it was a warning sign. It was a harbinger of something much bigger, something supernatural. As I delved deeper into my research, strange things started to happen. Equipment would malfunction, and I'd hear whispers in the night. It was like whatever I'd unleashed was starting to make its presence known. One night, I was working late when I heard a loud crash from the back of the lab. I rushed to see what had happened, and that's when I saw it. The Dogman was awake, its eyes blazing with an otherworldly intensity. But it wasn't alone. There were things around it, things that seemed to be made of shadow and darkness. They were moving, twisting, like they were alive. I tried to run, but my feet felt rooted to the spot. The Dogman took a step closer, and I felt this wave of fear wash over me. It wasn't attacking me, it was trying to warn me. It was trying to tell me that I'd made a terrible mistake. Suddenly, the lights flickered and died, plunging the lab into darkness. I was surrounded by an oppressive silence, and I knew I was in grave danger. When the lights came back on, the Dogman was gone, but the shadows remained. They seemed to be watching me, waiting for me to understand the true horror of what I'd unleashed. As I looked around the lab, I realized that I wasn't just a cryptid hunter anymore. I was a catalyst for something much bigger. Something that could destroy us all. You know, sometimes I think about that night and wonder if I should have just left the Dogman alone. But it's too late now. The fear of unleashing a horror beyond one's control, it's a fear that haunts me every day. And if you ever find yourself in the woods, hearing that howling, just remember, it might not be just a creature. It might be a warning that you're playing with forces beyond your control. The Dogman was just the beginning, and I'm afraid we're all just pawns in a much larger game. A game where the stakes are higher than we can imagine. So the next time you hear a strange noise in the night, don't just think it's a stray animal. Think about the legends that haunt our woods, and the horrors that lurk in the shadows. And if you ever see something that doesn't seem quite right, just remember, sometimes the most terrifying monsters are the ones we create ourselves. The cryptid hunter's dilemma is real, the choice between curiosity and caution. And sometimes the wrong choice can lead to consequences that are beyond our wildest nightmares. I'm not sure if I'll ever be able to go back to those woods again, but I do know one thing. I'll never look at the paranormal the same way. The fear of unleashing a horror beyond one's control, it's a fear that will haunt me forever. And if you ever hear that howling again, just remember, it might not be just a sound, it might be a warning that it's time to run. Because in the end, it's not just about surviving the night, it's about surviving the dawn. The cryptid hunter's dilemma is a lesson in humility, a reminder that some secrets are better left unexplored. And sometimes, the greatest horror is not what we find, but what we unleash. The Dogman's Call. I've always found solace in solitude. As a writer, I need quiet, undisturbed spaces to focus on my work. So when I decided to rent a secluded cabin in the Wisconsin Dells, I thought it was the perfect escape. The cabin was nestled deep in the woods, far from any distractions. It was just me, the trees, and the sound of the wind rustling through the leaves. Or so I thought. At first, everything was peaceful. I spent my days writing and my nights reading by the fireplace. The silence was almost therapeutic. But as the days passed, I started to feel a strange, unsettling presence. It wasn't anything I could see or touch, just a feeling that I was being watched. I tried to brush it off as paranoia, but it lingered. Then I started hearing it, a low, mournful howl that seemed to come from all directions. At first I thought it was just a wolf or a coyote, but there was something different about this sound. It was almost human. The howls grew louder, more frequent, and I began to feel an inexplicable pull. It was as if something was calling to me, drawing me deeper into the woods. I tried to resist, but the call was relentless. It echoed in my dreams, haunting me with an otherworldly longing. I started to feel like I was losing control, like I was being summoned by some unseen force. The fear was suffocating, but I couldn't help myself. I had to follow the sound. As I ventured deeper into the forest, the howls grew louder. I could feel the ground beneath my feet, the trees looming above me, and the darkness closing in. It was then that I realized I wasn't just following a sound. I was being led somewhere. But where? Suddenly, a twig snapped behind me. I spun around, but there was nothing. The silence that followed was oppressive, like the forest was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I quickened my pace, my heart racing with every step. The howls stopped abruptly, and I found myself standing at the edge of a clearing. In the center was an old, gnarled tree, its branches twisted and tangled. It seemed to be watching me. I felt a chill run down my spine as I approached it. Carved into the trunk was a symbol, a mix of ancient runes and something else, something primal. It was then that I remembered the stories about the Dogman, a creature said to roam these woods, a hybrid of man and beast. They said it could call to you, summon you with its howls. I never believed them, but now I wasn't so sure. As I stood there, the symbol seemed to pulse with a dark energy. I felt it calling to me, drawing me closer. It was then that I realized why I had been drawn here. The Dogman wasn't just summoning me, it was summoning my past. You see, I've always had a dark past, one I've tried to keep hidden. But the Dogman's call was forcing me to confront it. The howls weren't just a sound, they were a reminder of all the things I'd tried to forget. The fear of being summoned, of being forced to face my demons, it was overwhelming. I tried to turn back, but it was too late. The symbol on the tree began to glow, and I felt myself being pulled closer. I was trapped in a nightmare, with no escape. The Dogman's call had become a siren song, drawing me deeper into the heart of the forest. And then, everything went black. When I came to, I was back at the cabin, the fire burning low. It was as if nothing had happened, but I knew it had. The Dogman's call had awakened something in me, something I thought I'd left behind. I packed my bags and left the cabin that day. I never went back, but the memory of that call, it stays with me. The fear of being summoned by an unseen force, it's a fear that I hope none of you ever experience. You see, sometimes the things we fear the most aren't monsters or ghosts. They're the parts of ourselves we try to keep hidden. And in those woods, I was forced to confront mine. I'll never forget that call, that feeling of being drawn into the unknown. It's a fear that lingers, a fear that makes you question everything. And it's a fear that I hope will stay with me, reminding me of the night I was summoned by the Dogman. That was my experience with the Dogman's call. Not a story of horror, but a story of confrontation. Sometimes the most terrifying monsters are the ones we carry within us. The Dogman's prey. I've always loved working on farms. There's something about being out in the open, surrounded by nature, that just feels right. So when I got a job as a farmhand on a rural farm in southern Wisconsin, I thought it was a dream come true. The farm was beautiful, with rolling hills and fields that stretched as far as the eye could see. But it was isolated. The nearest town was miles away, and sometimes it felt like we were the only people in the world. At first, everything was great. The work was hard, but it was rewarding, and my coworkers were friendly. We'd spend our days tending to the animals and fixing equipment, and our nights sitting around the fire, swapping stories. But as the weeks went by, I started to feel like something was off. I'd catch glimpses of something moving out of the corner of my eye, and sometimes I'd hear strange noises at night, howling like a dog, but deeper and more menacing. I tried to brush it off as a stray animal or my imagination, but the feeling persisted. It was like I was being watched all the time. I'd see tracks in the mud that looked like they belonged to a large dog, but they were too big, too human-like. And then I started to find strange symbols carved into the trees, like someone was leaving me messages. I knew about the legend of the Dogman, of course. It's a creature that's supposed to roam these woods, half dog, half man. But I never thought it was real. Now I wasn't so sure. One night, I was out checking on the animals when I saw it. The Dogman was standing in the shadows, watching me. Its eyes glowed in the dark, and I could feel its gaze like a weight on my skin. I tried to run, but my feet felt rooted to the spot. For days, I barely slept. I was always on edge, expecting to see the Dogman again, but it didn't come back. Instead, I started to notice that things around the farm were changing. Tools would go missing and then reappear in strange places. It was like someone was playing tricks on me. And then, I found a note. It was buried in the dirt near the barn, and it said, "Prove yourself." I had no idea what it meant, but I felt a chill run down my spine. As the days passed, the occurrences grew more frequent. I'd find strange objects moved around, and sometimes I'd hear whispers in the wind. It was like the Dogman was testing me, pushing me to see how far I'd go. One night, I decided to confront it. I walked out into the woods, calling out to the Dogman, asking it to show itself. And then, I saw it. It was standing in front of me, its eyes blazing with an otherworldly intensity. But it didn't attack. Instead, it spoke to me. Its voice was low and rumbling, and it said, "You have been chosen. You must prove yourself worthy of this land." I was confused, but I knew I had to do something. So I started to work harder than ever before. I fixed fences, tended to the crops, and made sure the animals were healthy. And as I worked, I felt a strange connection to the land. It was like I was becoming a part of it. Days turned into weeks, and the Dogman didn't appear again, but I knew it was still watching me. I could feel its presence like a guardian over the farm. And then one morning, I woke up to find that everything was different. The crops were thriving, the animals were healthy, and the farm was prosperous. It was like the land itself had responded to my efforts. As I walked out into the fields, I saw the Dogman standing in the distance. But this time, it wasn't menacing. It was watching me with a sense of approval, like it had accepted me as a part of this place. I realized then that the Dogman wasn't a predator. It was a guardian. It was testing me to see if I was worthy of this land, if I would respect and care for it. And I had passed the test. But as I looked into its eyes, I felt a shiver run down my spine. I knew that I was now bound to this place, that I had to continue to prove myself worthy. The fear of being hunted and judged by a mysterious entity, it's a fear that I'll carry with me forever. As I stand here today, I know that I'll never be able to leave this farm. The Dogman will always be watching, waiting to see if I'll falter. And if I do, I have no doubt that it will come for me. The Dogman's prey isn't just its victims. It's anyone who dares to enter its domain. And once you're in, there's no turning back. You have to prove yourself day after day or face the consequences. I'm not sure if I'll ever be able to tell this story again, but I do know one thing. I'll never forget the fear of being judged by a creature that's not just a monster, but a guardian of the land. It's a fear that will haunt me for the rest of my life. The Dogman's presence is still felt around the farm. Sometimes I'll catch a glimpse of it out of the corner of my eye or hear its howling in the distance. But I know now that it's not something to be feared, it's something to be respected. And if you ever find yourself in a place like this, just remember, sometimes the most terrifying monsters are the ones that test us, that push us to be better. The fear of being hunted and judged, it's a fear that can change you forever. The Dogman's legend will live on, but for me, it's not just a story, it's my reality. I'm the Dogman's prey, and I'll be its prey for as long as I live on this land. But I'm not afraid anymore. I'm ready to face whatever challenges come my way, knowing that I have the Dogman watching over me, judging me, and pushing me to be worthy of this place. The Forest of Echoes. I've always been drawn to the solitude of nature. As a solo hiker, I find peace in the quiet of the forest, away from the hustle and bustle of everyday life. So, when I decided to hike through a dense forest near Elkhorn, Wisconsin, I was excited to spend some time alone with my thoughts. The forest was beautiful, with towering trees that seemed to stretch up to the sky and a carpet of leaves that crunched beneath my feet. As I walked, the silence was almost palpable. It was like the forest was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I felt a sense of calm wash over me, and I began to let my mind wander. But as the hours passed, I started to notice something strange. The forest seemed to be echoing my thoughts. I'd think about a particular memory, and suddenly I'd hear the sound of children laughing, or the rustle of leaves that sounded like my mother's voice. At first, it was comforting, like the forest was sharing my memories with me. But as the day wore on, the echoes started to change. They became darker, more sinister. I'd think about a fear or a guilt, and suddenly I'd hear the sound of footsteps behind me, or see a shadow darting between the trees. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself it was just my imagination, but deep down, I knew it was more than that. The forest was reflecting my deepest fears back at me, forcing me to confront the demons I'd been trying to keep hidden. As night began to fall, I set up camp, trying to distract myself with a book and a warm fire. But the echoes didn't stop. I'd hear whispers in the wind, whispers that sounded like my own voice, accusing me of things I'd done in the past. And then I saw it. The Dogman. It was standing just beyond the edge of the firelight, its eyes glowing like embers in the dark. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. But as I looked into its eyes, I saw something that made my blood run cold. My own reflection staring back at me. The Dogman wasn't just a creature, it was a manifestation of my own guilt. It was the physical embodiment of all the fears and doubts that I'd been trying to suppress. As I realized this, the forest seemed to grow quieter, the echoes fading away. But the Dogman didn't move. It just kept watching me, its eyes burning with an inner fire. I knew then that I had to confront it, to face the demons that I'd been running from for so long. I took a step forward, and the Dogman mirrored my movement. It was like we were dancing, moving in perfect sync. And as we drew closer, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I was finally facing my fears, finally acknowledging the guilt that had been haunting me. The Dogman reached out a hand, and I felt a jolt of electricity run through my body. It was like it was touching my soul, awakening a part of me that I'd been trying to keep hidden. As I looked into its eyes, I saw my own face staring back at me. And in that moment, I knew that I was the Dogman. I was the manifestation of my own fears, the embodiment of my deepest guilt. The forest was silent now, the echoes gone, but I knew that I'd never be able to escape the truth. The Dogman was me, and I was it. We were two sides of the same coin, forever bound together in a dance of fear and guilt. As I stood there, frozen in terror, the Dogman vanished into the darkness, but I knew it would always be with me, echoing my deepest fears and reminding me of the demons that I'd been trying to keep hidden. The fear of confronting one's inner demons. It's a fear that I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. And if you ever find yourself in a forest like that, just remember, the echoes you hear might not be just the wind or the trees. They might be the whispers of your own soul, calling you to face the fears that you've been trying to keep hidden. I never made it out of that forest, at least not in the way that I expected. I'm still here, trapped in this cycle of fear and guilt, forever bound to the Dogman that haunts me. And if you ever hear the sound of footsteps in the woods, just know that it might be me, still running from the demons that I've been trying to keep hidden. The Forest of Echoes is a place where the past and present collide, where the deepest fears and guilt are reflected back at you. And once you've entered that forest, there's no turning back. You'll be forever changed, forever haunted by the echoes of your own soul. The last hunt. I've been coming to this hunting reserve in central Wisconsin for years. It's always been a place where I can clear my head, connect with nature, and just enjoy the thrill of the hunt. My friends and I have made it a tradition to come here every fall, and this year was supposed to be no different. But as it turns out, this trip would change everything. We arrived on a crisp autumn morning, the kind of day where the mist still clings to the ground, and the trees are ablaze with color. It was perfect hunting weather. We set up our camp, and by mid-morning we were ready to head out. Our plan was to hunt deer, just like we always do. We had our gear, our maps, and our strategy. What we didn't have was a clue about what was waiting for us out there. As we walked deeper into the woods, the silence was almost deafening. It's not uncommon for the forest to be quiet, but this felt different. It felt like we were being watched. I brushed it off as paranoia, but the feeling lingered. We set up our stands and waited. Hours passed, and nothing. Not a single deer. It was as if they had vanished. Then we started hearing strange noises. At first, they were distant, howls and growls that seemed to come from all directions. We exchanged uneasy glances, but we're seasoned hunters. We've heard our fair share of wildlife. Yet there was something unsettling about these sounds. They seemed closer than they should be. As night began to fall, we decided to head back to camp. The darkness seemed to swallow us whole, and those sounds grew louder. It was then that we saw it, a pair of eyes watching us from the shadows. We froze. For a moment, it was just us and those eyes. Then they vanished. Suddenly, a branch snapped behind us. We spun around, but there was nothing. The silence that followed was oppressive. It was like the forest was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. We quickened our pace, our hearts racing. The camp seemed farther away than it should be. Every step felt like a betrayal, as if the forest itself was conspiring against us. And then we heard it. A low, menacing growl. It was close. Too close. That's when it hit us. We weren't the hunters. We were the prey. Something was stalking us. Something that didn't want us leaving these woods alive. We ran, our flashlights casting eerie shadows on the trees. The growling grew louder, and I could feel its breath on the back of my neck. I've heard stories about the Dogman, a creature said to roam these woods, a hybrid of man and beast. I never believed them. But now, I wasn't so sure. The howls and growls sounded almost human. We reached the camp, but it offered no safety. The creature was relentless, circling us, waiting for its moment to strike. We barricaded ourselves inside the cabin, but I knew it wouldn't hold. Not against something like this. As the night wore on, the attacks grew more aggressive. It was trying to get in, to get to us. We were trapped, with no way to call for help. The woods had become a nightmare, and we were just pawns in a game we didn't understand. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, everything stopped. The silence was deafening. We waited, frozen, expecting the worst. But nothing came. The sun began to rise, casting a pale light over the forest. We cautiously emerged from the cabin, our guns at the ready. That's when we saw it. Footprints. Not human, not animal. Something in between. The Dogman. It had been watching us, waiting for us, and in that moment I realized that we had been its prey all along. We packed up what we could and ran. We didn't stop until we were back in our cars, speeding away from those woods. We never looked back. But the memory of those eyes, that growl, it stays with me. The fear of being hunted, of being prey, it's a feeling I hope none of you ever experience. You see, sometimes the things we fear the most aren't monsters or ghosts. They're the things that remind us we're not at the top of the food chain. And in those woods, we were reminded of that in the most terrifying way possible. I'll never forget that night, that feeling of being hunted. It's a fear that lingers, a fear that makes you question everything. And it's a fear that I hope will stay with me, reminding me of the night I became the prey. That was my last hunt. Not because I lost my taste for it, but because I realized that sometimes it's better to be the observer, not the participant. The woods are full of mysteries, and some are better left unexplored. The legend of Gadara. Growing up in Racine, Wisconsin, I heard all sorts of stories about the Dogman. It's this creature that's supposed to be half dog, half man, and it's been spotted around here for decades. My family's got a pretty interesting connection to it too. You see, my ancestor, Mark Shackleman, was one of the first people to ever see the Dogman back in the 1930s. Now, I've always thought it was just a cool story, but lately, I've been experiencing some pretty weird stuff. It started a few weeks ago when I began having these vivid dreams. In them, I'm walking through the woods near my house, and I hear this howling. It's not like any animal I've ever heard before. It's deep and haunting, and it always seems to be coming from just out of sight. At first, I brushed it off as stress or something, but then I started noticing things around the house. Doors would be open when I knew I'd closed them, and sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of something moving out of the corner of my eye. It was always gone when I turned to look, but it freaked me out. One night, I was working late in my home office when I heard a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I got up to check who it was. When I opened the door, there was no one there, but then I heard it again. That howling. This time, it was louder, and it sounded like it was right outside my house. I tried to tell myself it was just a stray dog or something, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. I locked all the doors and windows and tried to focus on my work, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. The next day, I decided to do some research on my family's history. I went to the local library and started digging through old records and newspapers. That's when I found this old diary belonging to my ancestor, Mark Shackleman. As I flipped through the pages, I realized that his encounter with the Dogman wasn't just a random sighting. It was something much more sinister. According to the diary, Mark had made a pact with the Dogman. He had been struggling to make ends meet during the Depression, and the Dogman offered him a deal: prosperity and protection for his family in exchange for something. The diary didn't specify what, but it hinted at a terrible price that would have to be paid someday. I couldn't believe what I was reading. My whole life, I'd thought my family's success was just due to hard work and luck. But now, it seemed like it was all built on some kind of supernatural debt. As I read on, I started to feel this creeping sense of dread. It was like I was being watched, even in the library. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see something, but there was never anything there. That night, I had another one of those dreams. This time, I was standing in front of an old, abandoned house on the outskirts of town. The howling was louder than ever, and I could feel the ground shaking beneath my feet. Suddenly, the door creaked open by itself, and I saw a figure standing in the doorway. It was the Dogman, its eyes glowing in the dark. I woke up with a start, my heart racing. It was then that I realized the dreams weren't just dreams, they were warnings. The Dogman was trying to tell me something. The next day, I decided to visit that old house from my dream. It was abandoned and looked like it hadn't been lived in for years, but as I approached, I felt this strange energy around me. It was like the air was charged with electricity. I pushed open the creaky door and stepped inside. The house was dark and musty, but I could sense that I wasn't alone. I started to explore room by room until I came to a door that seemed out of place. It was hidden behind a tattered curtain, and it looked newer than the rest of the house. As I reached out to open it, I heard a faint whisper in my ear. "It's time to pay." I spun around, but there was no one there. That's when I felt a cold breath on the back of my neck, and I knew I wasn't alone. I turned the handle and pushed the door open. What I saw made my blood run cold. Inside the room there were old photographs and newspaper clippings about my family, and in the center of it all, there was a large, leather-bound book. As I opened it, I saw that it was filled with names, all of my ancestors, going back generations. At the bottom of the last page there was a note. It said, "The debt is due." Suddenly, the room went dark, and I was plunged into silence. I stumbled backward, trying to find my way out, but the door slammed shut behind me. I was trapped, and then I heard it, the howling. It was right outside the door, and it was getting louder. I knew then that I was the last in line to pay the price. My ancestors' pact had been passed down through generations, and now it was my turn. As I stood there, frozen in fear, the door creaked open by itself, and that's when I saw it. The Dogman, standing in the doorway, its eyes fixed on me. I tried to scream, but my voice was caught in my throat. The Dogman took a step closer, its jaws open wide, and then everything went black. When I came to, I was lying on the floor, the room empty and silent. But as I stumbled out of the house, I realized that I wasn't alone. The Dogman was watching me from the shadows, waiting for me to fulfill the pact. And that's when it hit me, the true horror of it all. I wasn't just paying a debt, I was becoming part of the legend. The fear of inherited curses and supernatural debts isn't just a story, it's my reality now. As I look around this room, I wonder if any of you have ever felt like you're being watched. Because I know I am, and soon, it won't just be me. The legend of Gadara will live on, and it will come for all of us. You know, sometimes I think about those dreams and wonder if they were more than just warnings. Maybe they were a glimpse into a future that's already been written, a future where the Dogman comes for us all. I guess that's the thing about legends. They never really end. They just wait for the next chapter to begin. And I'm afraid I'm just the beginning. So, the next time you hear a strange howl in the night, don't just think it's a stray dog. Think about the legends that haunt our town and the debts that are waiting to be paid. And if you ever find yourself walking through those woods at night and you hear that howling, just remember, it might not be just a sound. It might be a warning that it's time to pay. The legend of Gadara is real, and it's coming for us all. The Lost Expedition. Last summer, I decided to go on a camping trip with some friends to the wilderness of northern Wisconsin. We'd all been friends since college, and it was supposed to be a fun adventure. Just us, the woods, and some quality time away from the city. We packed our gear, loaded up the car, and headed out early on a Friday morning. The drive was beautiful, winding through forests and past lakes. We were all excited, chatting about what we'd do once we got there. Hiking, fishing, maybe even spotting some wildlife. We arrived at the campsite in the late afternoon. It was secluded, surrounded by dense woods and a small stream running through it. We set up our tents and started a fire, enjoying the peacefulness of the place. As night began to fall, we sat around the fire, swapping stories and laughing. But as it got darker, the woods started to feel a bit more ominous. The trees seemed to loom over us, casting long shadows in the flickering firelight. We heard some strange noises, twigs snapping, leaves rustling, but we figured it was just animals. We were deep in the woods after all. The first night was uneventful, but the second night was different. We were all sitting around the fire again when we heard this howling. It was distant at first, but it seemed to be getting closer. We looked at each other, unsure what to make of it. Some of us thought it might be a wolf or a coyote, but it sounded different, deeper, more menacing. As the night wore on, the howling stopped, and we tried to get some sleep. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I kept waking up to check if everything was okay, but there was never anything out of the ordinary. The next day, we decided to go on a hike. The trail was beautiful, winding through the forest and over hills. But as we walked, we started to notice that the trees around us seemed to be altered. Some of them had strange symbols carved into the bark, and others looked like they'd been recently disturbed. We didn't think much of it at first, but as we continued on the trail, we realized that we were lost. The sun was starting to set, and we had no idea how to get back to the campsite. Panic started to set in as we frantically searched for a way out. As night began to fall, we huddled together, trying to stay warm and calm. But then, we heard it again, that howling. This time, it was closer, and it sounded like it was coming from all directions. We knew then that we weren't alone in the woods. Suddenly, a branch snapped behind us. We spun around, but there was nothing there. It was then that I saw it, a pair of eyes watching us from the darkness. They were low to the ground, and they seemed to be moving closer. We tried to run, but our feet felt heavy, like we were stuck in place, and then everything went black. When I came to, I was lying on the forest floor, my head throbbing. The others were scattered around me, some of them unconscious, others crying out in pain. As I struggled to sit up, I saw it, the Dogman standing over us, its eyes fixed on me. But it wasn't alone. There were other creatures around it, creatures that looked like they were made from the shadows themselves. They seemed to be watching us, waiting for something to happen. The Dogman took a step closer, its jaws open wide. And then I felt this strange sensation, like I was being pulled into the darkness. The last thing I remember is the sound of my friends screaming and the feeling of being consumed by an eternal night. When I woke up again, I was back in my tent, the sun shining through the fabric. The others were stirring, looking around in confusion. We quickly realized that we had no idea how we'd gotten back to the campsite or what had happened during the night. As we packed up our gear to leave, we noticed something strange. The symbols on the trees were gone, but there were new marks on the ground, like footprints, but they didn't look human. They looked animalistic. We didn't say much on the drive back home. We were all shaken, unsure what had happened in those woods. But as we approached the city, I caught a glimpse of something in the rearview mirror, a figure standing by the side of the road, watching us leave. It was the Dogman, and it was not alone. You know, sometimes I think about that trip and wonder if we really escaped, or if we just delayed the inevitable. The fear of being trapped and hunted in the wilderness, it's a fear that never really goes away. And if you ever find yourself lost in those woods, just remember, you're not alone. There are things out there that will hunt you, things that will make you wish you'd never ventured into the wild. The wilderness can be beautiful, but it can also be deadly. And sometimes the most terrifying monsters are the ones you can't see. So the next time you hear a strange howl in the night, don't just think it's a stray animal. Think about the legends that haunt our woods and the creatures that lurk in the shadows. And if you ever see eyes watching you from the darkness, just run. Because in the end, it's not just about surviving the night, it's about surviving the dawn. The Lost Expedition was just the beginning, and I'm afraid we're all just pawns in a much larger game. A game where the wilderness is the board, and we're the prey. The Night Watchman's Descent. I used to work as a night watchman at an old lighthouse on Lake Michigan's coast in Wisconsin. It was a solitary job, but I liked the peace and quiet of being out there alone with the waves. The lighthouse was abandoned, but I'd been hired to keep an eye on it, make sure no one broke in or vandalized the place. It was a beautiful spot, with the lake stretching out as far as the eye could see. But it was also eerie, especially at night. The wind would howl through the empty rooms, and the beam of the lighthouse would sweep across the water, casting an otherworldly glow over everything. I'd been working there for months without incident, but then one night, everything changed. I was making my rounds when I saw it, the Dogman. It was standing on the edge of the cliff, looking out at the lake. Its eyes glowed in the dark, and I could feel its gaze like a weight on my skin. I tried to run, but my feet felt rooted to the spot. The Dogman didn't move, it just kept watching me. And then, it vanished into thin air. I was left standing there, shaken and confused. After that, I couldn't shake the feeling that the Dogman was still out there, watching me. I started to see things, shadows moving in the corners of my vision, hearing whispers in the wind. I knew I had to get out of there, so I quit my job and left the lighthouse behind. But the memories lingered. I couldn't sleep at night, haunted by the image of the Dogman's glowing eyes. I started to feel like I was losing my grip on reality, like I was descending into madness. So I made a decision. I would go back to the lighthouse, face my fears head on. I packed a bag and drove back to the coast, determined to confront whatever demons were haunting me. As I approached the lighthouse, I felt a sense of trepidation. The building loomed above me, its tower reaching up into the darkness like a skeletal finger. I pushed open the creaky door and stepped inside, calling out into the emptiness. But there was no answer, just the sound of the wind and the creaking of the old wooden beams. I started to explore, room by room, but everything seemed different. The shadows seemed to move of their own accord, and I could feel eyes watching me from the darkness. And then, I saw it again, the Dogman. It was standing in the lantern room, looking out at the lake. Its eyes glowed with an otherworldly intensity, and I felt my heart racing in my chest. But this time, it didn't just watch me. It started to move towards me, its eyes fixed on mine. I tried to run, but my feet felt heavy, like they were rooted to the spot. As the Dogman drew closer, I felt my mind start to unravel. I was consumed by visions of the past and present, all blending together in a mad jumble. I saw myself as a child, playing on the beach. I saw myself as an old man, dying alone in a hospital bed. And I saw the Dogman, always watching, always waiting. The Dogman reached out a hand and touched my face, and in that moment, I felt my sanity slip away. I was no longer Jack, the night watchman. I was something else, something consumed by the madness that had been lurking inside me all along. As I looked into the Dogman's eyes, I saw my own reflection staring back at me. And I knew then that I was trapped, forever bound to this place, forever haunted by the demons that I'd been trying to keep hidden. The fear of being consumed by one's own sanity, it's a fear that I'll never be able to escape. And if you ever find yourself in a place like that, just remember, the line between reality and madness is thin, and once you cross it, there's no turning back. I'm still here, trapped in this lighthouse, haunted by the Dogman and my own guilt. And if you ever hear the sound of screams coming from the coast, just know that it might be me, still descending into the depths of my own madness. The Night Watchman's descent is a journey into the heart of darkness, a journey from which there is no return. And once you've started down that path, you'll never be able to find your way back. The Dogman will always be waiting, leading you deeper into the abyss until you're consumed by the very fears that you've been trying to keep hidden. I'm not sure how much longer I'll be able to hold on. The Dogman is always here, watching me, waiting for me to succumb to the madness that's been eating away at me. And when I finally do, I'll be just another ghost haunting this abandoned lighthouse, forever trapped in a world of fear and despair. The Witness. You guys know how small towns can be, right? Everyone knows everyone, and news spreads like wildfire. Well, our town in Wisconsin was no exception. A few weeks ago, there was a sighting of the Dogman, this creature that's supposed to be half dog, half man. It caused a lot of panic, and people were talking about it everywhere. I was one of the few who claimed to have seen it. I was out walking my dog late one night when I saw this thing. It was tall, with eyes that glowed in the dark. At first, I thought it was just a stray animal, but as I looked closer, I realized it was something much more sinister. I told my story to the local news, and suddenly I was the center of attention. People were calling me, asking for details, and some were even accusing me of making it up for attention. But I knew what I saw, and I knew it was real. As the days went by, the town started to change. People were on edge, looking over their shoulders, expecting to see the Dogman around every corner. Some started to form vigilante groups, determined to hunt it down. And then, things took a darker turn. People began to turn on each other. They started accusing their neighbors of being in league with the Dogman, of being somehow connected to it. It was like a witch hunt, with fear and paranoia driving everyone's actions. I tried to speak out against it, to tell people that we needed to calm down and think rationally. But no one listened. They just kept saying that I was the one who had started it all, that I was the reason for the fear and the chaos. One night, I received a threatening letter. It said that if I didn't leave town, I'd be the next one to disappear. I knew then that I was in real danger. The Dogman wasn't the monster. It was the fear it inspired in humans. I started to feel like I was being watched all the time. I'd see people lurking in the shadows, and I'd hear whispers in the wind. It was like the whole town had turned against me. And then it happened. I was walking home from work when I saw a group of people waiting for me. They were armed, and they looked like they meant business. I tried to run, but they caught me. As they dragged me to the outskirts of town, I realized that I was about to become the latest victim of their fear and paranoia. They were going to make me pay for being the witness, for being the one who had seen the Dogman. But just as they were about to do something terrible, we heard it. That howling. The Dogman was coming, and it was heading straight for us. The group froze, unsure what to do. And in that moment of confusion, I managed to escape. I ran as fast as I could, not stopping until I was back in my house, locked safely inside. As I looked out the window, I saw the Dogman standing in the distance, watching me. But it wasn't the creature that scared me. It was the people. The fear of being ostracized and hunted by your own community. It's a fear that's hard to shake. You know, sometimes I think about that night and wonder if I'll ever be able to go back to that town. But I know I won't. The fear and paranoia that the Dogman inspired, it's a poison that can't be cured. And if you ever find yourself in a situation like that, just remember, the true horror isn't the monster. It's the fear it inspires in humans. The fear of being hunted by your own community. It's a fear that can destroy you from the inside out. So, the next time you hear a strange noise in the night, don't just think it's a stray animal. Think about the legends that haunt our towns and the horrors that we create ourselves. And if you ever see a group of people turning on each other, just remember, sometimes the most terrifying monsters are the ones we create in our own minds. The witness is not just a person who sees something. It's a person who has to live with the consequences of what they've seen. And sometimes, those consequences can be deadly. I'm not sure if I'll ever be able to tell my story again, but I do know one thing. I'll never forget the fear of being hunted by my own community. It's a fear that will haunt me forever. And if you ever find yourself in a small town where fear and paranoia are running rampant, just remember, the true horror is not what you see, it's what you create. The fear of being ostracized and hunted by your own community. It's a fear that can destroy us all. The Dogman might be a legend, but the fear it inspires is very real. And sometimes that fear can be more terrifying than any monster.
Thanks for joining us in the shadows tonight. If you enjoyed these chilling tales, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more spine-tingling stories every week. Have you got a story of your own? Share it in the comments below. We love hearing from you. And remember, the darkness holds many secrets. Are you brave enough to uncover them? Until next time, keep your lights on and your doors locked. Sweet nightmares.